So for the past almost 7 years now, I've been working as a facilitator for the Douglas Corps Area Restoration Team. As Susan indicated, I and Dolly Edmonds are going to be co-presenting today, and I'm going to turn it over to Dolly to introduce herself and then also kick off our presentation.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dolly Edmonds, and I am the Policy and Outreach Director for Audubon Rockies. We are a regional office of National Audubon Society, serving Wyoming, Colorado, and Utah. Next. And as Jana had indicated, we are going to be doing some tag teaming in this presentation. It is broken up into 7 parts. And if you look at your slide on the top left-hand corner of your slide, you're going to see numbers, and those are going to be tracking those 7 points in our outline. We're going to be setting the stage and familiarizing you with the Douglas Corps Area Restoration Team, what was the impetus for our formation, and the outline for our approach. We're going to be talking about our structure and project design. We'll examine how effective we've been and how we've evolved over time. And I think some of the big points that's going to be good with today's talk is we're going to share with you what we perceive as barriers and challenges to our work. And finally, we're going to wrap up with some key takeaways related to outreach, stakeholders, and partnerships. Next, please. So the purpose of this slide is to really orient everyone to the general area within the sagebrush biome where we've been working on habitat restoration work. And as described in several presentations yesterday, there really is a considerable heterogeneity in plant community structure throughout this biome. The Douglas Corps area, or DCA, is located in northeastern Wyoming. It falls within an area that has been historically considered grass-dominated within the sagebrush components. In this landscape, we have perennial species return really quite rapidly after a fire. However, even decades after the fire, the landscape still appears to remain relatively devoid of sagebrush. Like much of northeastern Wyoming, large areas of the sagebrush steppe habitat were historically treated and have been converted to grassland or crops. There's existing energy development and a history of significant wildfires. Next. Now, when we're talking about the Douglas Corps area, why here and a little bit more about it. The Douglas Corps area has really become a focus for deliberate, coordinated management activities. A number of factors led to the development and establishment of the Douglas Corps Area Restoration Team. This core area is relatively small. It's located along the eastern boundary of the current distribution of sage-grouse, seen here in that orange circle on your far right. As Bob noted earlier, core areas are part of the conservation strategy, the purpose of which is to limit development in high-quality habitats that are integral to the conservation of sage-grouse over time. When the Douglas Corps Area Restoration Team was established in 2013, disturbance in the Douglas Corps area was really high, greater than 5%. Approximately 10% of this core area has actually been burned by wildfires in the past 25 years, and reestablishment of sagebrush within these areas has remained low. Majority of the land here is held within private land ownership, and there are competing demands on the landscape, including valid and existing rights for oil and gas development. Now, the Douglas Corps area has a small number of birds. At present, the density of sage-grouse in the DCA continues to be one of the lowest in the state, consisting of only 5 occupied leks. When looking at lek counts between 2000 and 2018, in that 10-year frame, the peak number of males ranges between 7 to a high of 53. So despite these relatively low numbers, comparatively low numbers to other places around Wyoming, Wyoming Game and Fish Department does view this population of sage-grouse as potentially genetically significant because of its geographical location relative to other populations in the state. Next.
So in 2013, Chesapeake Operating, in conjunction with its pipeline partner at the time, Williams, developed the plan for development in coordination with the state of Wyoming as well as the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. And you can see a copy of the plan here. It was initially developed in 2013, like I said, and it extended for a 5-year period. That plan was renewed in 2018, and so will continue for 5 additional years. Bob talked quite a bit about the mitigation or hierarchy in his presentation, and the mitigation hierarchy was really critical in the development of this plan. Where possible, Chesapeake operating in strategically sited wells to avoid and minimize impacts. And this approach balanced conservation with development, and where not possible, mitigation was applied. Next slide, please. So the Douglas Core Area, or DCA, as you'll hear Dolly and I talk about it throughout this presentation, was developed following an extensive review of habitat quality data that resulted in dividing the core area into 3 different management units. And you can see these here with the blue, gray, and tan coloring on the right. As shown, the blue areas are predominantly high quality habitat. You can see the location of Lex with those green boxes. Gray was predominantly suitable habitat or connectivity corridors. And then the tan was predominantly disturbed or low quality unsuitable habitat. Also shown here for the Douglas Core Area are the locations of disturbed areas and wildfire areas as well. The pink is showing you areas that were disturbed, and the pink surrounded by those blue lines shows you a number of locations where there were significant wildfires over time, the large of which took place in the northern part of the Douglas Core Area. Next slide, please. As Dolly indicated, and as you can see here, the Douglas Core is about 67,000 acres, and the vast majority of this is private land. So the white colors in this outline of the Douglas Core Area is showing you private land ownership. There are some state land parcels that cover about 7% and some federal lands as well. But it became very apparent to the team up front that this was a private land or an opportunity for partnerships with private landowners. Next slide, please. Funding for the Douglas Core Area Restoration Team was, the initial pool of funding was set aside as mitigation and earmarked for restoration projects. Throughout the course of time, the industry partners that are integral to this group have also provided financial support. And the team has also been really active in leveraging some of the initial funds that were established to pursue additional funding. These are funds that, both small and large, that have been used for things such as cheatgrass management and spraying in collaboration with local weed and pest, as well as some research funding as well. And one of the key pieces that's been actually really integral to this pursuance of additional funding is the multi-stakeholder members of the Douglas Core Area Restoration Team. Since the team itself is not really an entity, it's a loose group of individuals who have come together. Participating members have been integral as helping to be the project proponent for a variety of grants. Next slide, please.
So when we talk about who is the DCA Restoration Team, again, we were established in 2013. We are a multi-stakeholder team comprised of partners working to advance our collective knowledge of sage-grouse habitat conservation. In front of you is a list of who all these active members are. They come from local, state, and federal agencies, non-governmental organizations, oil and gas industry, and academia. Over 20 members, which is really quite impressive. The latter of which, the academia, has really provided valuable research expertise and university connections. Together, we are supported by 2 contracting entities, Trihydro, for which Jana works for, and Western Ecosystems Technology. Next, please. The DCA's restoration team on the ground work is really focused on reducing the footprint of existing disturbances within the Douglas Core Area. Because again, our goal is to enhance the overall habitat for sage-grouse and sagebrush obligate species. Our work is focused in 3 areas. The top 2, which are circled, we're going to describe in a bit more detail in this presentation, but ultimately we're going to report out on all 3. We developed projects to enhance seasonal habitat to support survival and reproduction of sage-grouse. Secondly, we strove to restore disturbed habitat to suitable or functional grouse habitat, and we implemented projects that target local threats to sage-grouse in northeastern Wyoming. Next, please. We are also looking at the operational structure here, and the DCA Restoration Team has been led by contractors who facilitate meetings. They oversee project development, implementation logistics, they coordinate with landowners, and really provide overall operational capacity. The importance of this role can't be emphasized in the Douglas Corps Area Restoration Team's work. Additionally, there has been consistent support from the state of Wyoming. Our team meets about 10 to 12 times per year, which really facilitates transparency, relationship, and trust building, as well as the timely ability to discuss and adjust approaches. We have a diverse expertise on the team, which really allows meaningful engagement on a variety of subgroups. These subgroups range everywhere from outreach development, project development, cheatgrass management. And our members of our team are organized and participate in various project site visits. We also took part to varied degrees in field work, which has occurred not only for planning purposes, but also for plantings and subsequent monitorings. Next.
Another critical element in our operational structure is the partnerships that the team has established with private landowners. Project development has really been a one-on-one collaborative approach that has been based on the explicit recognition of the diversity of ecosystem services that these lands provide. And so you can see in this one photo here at the base of the slide, you can see cattle in the background and a fenced exclosure. These are working lands, and a very integral part of our working relationship with private landowners was developing a plan that met the objectives of their land operation. And a really key aspect of this process over time was that building of trust. Our team established from a very early phase landowner liaisons, and these two folks in particular who had significant relationships with landowners in the Douglas Corps area over time allowed the team to navigate development of particular projects. And they've remained active members of our team through time, which has really helped to ensure consistency and continuity. We'll be developing a few projects for next fall that will be, again, in combination with some of the landowners we've worked with in the past. And I think this piece is really critical because ultimately the team was in a process of building a reputation where they were having positive relationships with landowners. During the first project, this was really key and has really allowed for expanding that to working in other areas within the Corps. Next slide, please. I'll talk just briefly about project design because it was grounded in the tremendous amount of technical expertise that comes with a multi-stakeholder team. The team's approach to establishing sagebrush or reestablishing sagebrush within areas that were burned via wildfire was establishing seed source islands. Two of the reasons for this: sagebrush seed typically does not disperse very far. It's 1 to 5 meters maybe at most, and seed doesn't remain very viable over time. And so you can imagine, and I have a cartoon here to illustrate this, if you have a wildfire or a burn perimeter here, it may take a very long time due to the way in which sagebrush plants produce seed and then ultimately recruit. And so the team's approach was to establish these seed source islands. You can see them here kind of shown with the blue under bars to effectively break up this perennial grass landscape and introduce seed sources within it. These processes were about a year in the making and began with collection of local seed and greenhouse growing of seedlings that ultimately resulted in outplantings within project areas. Next slide, please. So as we start to wrap up this presentation, we'll touch on briefly assessing the effectiveness of the team by looking at those 3 focal areas that Dolly introduced at the beginning of the presentation. So the first was developing projects to enhance seasonal habitat to support survival and reproduction of sage-grouse. And From 2014 to 2018, we established 6 projects on the landscape and outplanted about 100,000 sagebrush seedlings. These projects were in 3 discrete project areas that cumulatively are about 1,000 acres, and those are the ones that are here shown in the bottom part, or maybe on the side of the Douglas core area here, outlined in red. Those are notably within that higher quality habitat type and in close proximity to existing sage-grouse leks. 3 additional projects occurred in the North Burn area, which is this area that's a little over 5,000 acres in the northern part of the Douglas core area. You can see 3 project areas that are highlighted with red as well, and these were done and were complementary to some reestablishment efforts that were conducted by Wyoming Game and Fish Department. For fall 2020, we have about 50,000 seedlings that are currently growing in the greenhouse to be also planted into these existing project areas in collaboration with some of the private landowners in the Douglas core area. Next slide. As far as the 2 other goals, these are also things that the team has worked on during the last almost 7 years. We have will be hitting the 5-year milestone for several of our projects this fall, and we continue to collect data annually to kind of chart the progress of the sagebrush seedlings and increases in cover over time. And so ultimately, Bob outlined that reclassification process within the previous presentation, but the goal is to actually reclassify some of these areas from disturbed to transitional habitat over time. They are used by sage-grouse, so they function as functional habitat. And we've also documented the successful recruitment of some of the seedlings in these areas. We also, through 2 other efforts, targeted local threats to sage-grouse in northeastern Wyoming. We implemented a West Nile virus program, as well as using some of the NRCS RCPP funds, did some spraying for cheatgrass in collaboration with private landowners. Next slide.
And let me just mention just a couple, 2 or 3 more minutes. If you think you can wrap up the presentation, then that would be great. And we'll have a little time for questions. Thank you.
All right, so we'll quickly wrap up here. Adaptive management has been really critical to our process, simply because even though we had a team of technical experts, I think the science of sagebrush restoration is evolving through time. Our projects have been grounded in frequent data collection and reviewing those data so that we can take that information and make meaningful changes through time in the subsequent implementation of projects. And they've considered things such as biology as well as cost elements. Next slide.
So how have we evolved over time? We've been together for more than 6 years, and this is impressive, not only in recognizing the breadth of participants, but also the consistency in commitment by all the parties. We have talked about funding sources and the variety has been growing over time. And we've also increased our outreach and external communications, which has helped in networking efforts. We've done field tours, fact sheets, social media campaigns via Sage West, and presented at professional conferences. Next. When we talk about barriers and challenges, again, one of the greatest that we've confronted is the temporal mismatch of slow-moving, recovering ecosystems with really quickly moving pressures on the local and landscape scales. We've heard speakers talk about this, but again, it's how do we reestablish sagebrush to where it's considered suitable when it can oftentimes take decades to accomplish. Recruitment of seedlings continues to be uncertain in both time and space, but it is critical. Another challenge is interest and engagement of private landowners whose economic livelihood is dependent on livestock grazing, and how can we make sure that their needs are being continued to be met. Finally, as is the case with most collaborative efforts, project funding is dwindling even though need remains. Next.
Wrap up here with a couple takeaway slides. This approach to habitat enhancement and restoration for sage-grouse and sagebrush obligate species has only really been possible through the sustained commitment of this multi-stakeholder group, the partnerships with private landowners, and then also the team's emphasis and desire for outreach. And Dolly outlined a number of the ways in which that has come about. The other piece is to just also recognize here our consistent state support from the state of Wyoming, Wyoming Game and Fish Department. We've had members of Wyoming Game and Fish Department on our team since its inception. Many of these have remained the same, and that element has been so critical to the success of the team. We've also, with our team of subject matter experts, it's been a very much science-driven approach, and the team has really remained engaged over time through a number of processes. Next slide. And I think I'll wrap up. Ultimately, yeah, I'll just wrap up and take questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation. Again, we do have, it looks like a number of questions. So let's go ahead and take those. And just to let people know, we promised a 5-minute pause here where you can step away from your screen. Let's go ahead and take a couple of questions here, and then we will take that brief break. So Liz, why don't you go ahead with the questions?
Okay, first question here is, did you consider planting sagebrush directly from seed versus seedlings? And how are seedlings protected from wildlife overuse, especially mule deer, legomorphs, etc.?
Should I take that one, Dolly? Okay. So as Dolly indicated, one of the key pieces of this has been researchers from the University of Wyoming being integral to the team's efforts. And there was a University of Wyoming graduate student who investigated seed recruitment through some studies. And some of what his work demonstrated is some of the real challenges is in reestablishing intact grasslands from seed. A key point to the areas, most of the areas that the team has worked in are many years post-fire, not immediately post-fire. And so there's a really dense grass canopy, as you can see here. And so dispersing seed into that is not terribly successful. And so that has been a primary motivation for using seedlings as opposed to disturbing seed. And then in response to the question about herbivory, we've actually done some herbivory monitoring. One of the slides showed some tagging that we use to actually measure and monitor herbivory over time, and it is significant. For a lot of our initial projects, you can see the project disclosures here that prevented herbivory in the first number of years, but when those are taken down, they can be really substantial. And so what we're observing in a number of sites is pretty static growth of seedlings, just accounting for that consistent herbivory, particularly during winter months.
Great, thanks. We'll jump to the next question here, which is, what spray or chemicals are used to treat cheatgrass?
In these particular areas, we used plateau.
Okay, great. And then anything else you wanted to add on that, or is that good?
I think that's,
okay.
If there's additional questions, I can respond.
Then the last question we have here is just if you could tell us a little bit more about your West Nile program.
That's a good question. And I'm probably not the best person to be answering it because that wasn't a piece that I oversaw, but our West Nile virus program involved annual surveys, and then annual surveys, I think, for the particular mosquito, and then treatment. And like I indicated, I did not oversee that, but I can certainly connect you with somebody who has.
All right. I think for time, we will go ahead and stop with those three, but it sounds like we do have, or looks like we do have one more, and we will get those to you, Dolly and Jana, for you to respond to. And again, we'll post those on our online site as well. So really appreciate excellent presentation. Again, appreciate the questions. Helps for the interactivity here. And so with that, let's go ahead and take a 5-minute pause. We'll keep projecting, but just give everybody a chance to step away. And if you can just leave your sound on so that you'll be able to hear us when we're coming back, but we'll be pretty close to 5 minutes. So thank you, and we'll see you in a few minutes.